Hi everyone, welcome to the Bio Edge.
Why is it that elephants produce such obviously wasteful, you could say flagrantly wasteful fecal matter? If you've ever walked in the African bush on safari in elephant country and found fresh elephant dung, you will surely have noticed that the stuff just seems to be seething with food value. It looks far from dry, exhausted fiber, as you might expect in an animal that eats material that's poor to start with, which is woody and fibrous plant material, extracting everything it can from that. I mean, you might suppose that herbivores would all digest their food in such a way that they extract every bit of nourishment out of their unpromising food matter. But in the case of the elephant, it seems the other way around. In fact, we at the BioEdge dare say that if you actually analyze the protein content of elephant feces, you'd often find that the protein content is higher than in the food that the elephant actually ate. And so elephants present a kind of a paradox because they're out there foraging most of the time, taking hours and hours to forage. They're using an extremely specialized and elaborate and remarkable foraging organ, the proboscis, and they have extremely specialized teeth. Moreover, they have a dental arrangement whereby when they run out of their last chewing teeth, they actually die. Even if the rest of the body is functioning well, the animal starves to death because the elephant depends entirely on its ability to chew up vast amounts of fibrous material every day to sustain itself. And so the paradox is that the elephant puts so much into eating and yet seems to put so little care into digestion, so that much of its efforts in foraging seem to be blatantly wasted in what amounts to producing food for dung beetles. The moment the feces come out of an elephant, the dung beetles, some of them very large and hungry looking, zero in and make a nice life out of rolling up and burying the dung and producing babies in it. And so the very avidness with which dung beetles approach elephant feces tells you that there's something strange about how food-rich elephant feces are. Now, how do we explain this? Well, let's broaden our perspective a little, and let's realize that when it comes to feces in general in the animal world, it's far from true to say that animals extract a predictable proportion of food from their feces. To give you an example close to home, human feces may seem to be waste from our point of view, but in many villages in the third world, human feces are not just food for dogs, but they are the main food for dogs. You may even hypothesize, without being too politically correct about it, that one of the initial factors in the domestication of the dog in the first place was the utility of dogs as latrine clearers, as animals that could make a nice living out of human feces and return the favor by cleaning up and keeping hygienic the vicinity of settlements. So dogs could actually be, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but dogs could actually be the domestic animal that started out as a fecal eater, a feces eater of the human species. When you look at the lion, the lion digests its food so superficially that sometimes the hooded vulture will simply forage by sitting around a group of lions all day long, not even bothering to take to the sky, knowing that at some point the lion will produce fecal matter that is so rich and yummy that that makes a perfectly good meal for a hooded vulture. And so there are two examples of animals, humans and lions, that produce feces that are somewhat wasteful. At the other end of the spectrum, we have animals like the fungus culturing termites, such as macrotermes, that essentially produce no dung at all because they keep recycling their feces into their own fungus culture inside the termite mound, and the feces are so thoroughly reused that at the end of the multiple cycling of the feces, you have nothing really left but carbon dioxide and water. And so it's true to say that at some level, certain kinds of termites don't produce feces at all. Slightly less extreme is the case of the cecotrophic rodents, which include the domestic guinea pig as well as the capybara, which is the largest living rodent on Earth today. And these rodents recycle their feces in a different way because they produce fecal pellets that they re-ingest and redigest and recycle them in this way, and only discard and refuse to eat extremely impoverished fibrous feces that are so sterile that if you pick up the fresh fecal pellets and crush it between your fingers, you won't even be able to smell much. It's really been completely exhausted even of its bacterial content. So the point here is that feces span an extremely wide range in terms of the apparent wastefulness of material, from exhausted rabbit feces, which are essentially just pure cellulose, through to lion feces, which can be so protein rich that they are virtual delicatessen offerings out there in the nutrition of the bush. Now, where do elephants sit in all of this? Well, elephants would have to be on the more wasteful side. And so what's the common theme in this? Why is it that some animals are more thorough than others in their digestion of food? Well, we would suggest here at the BioEdge that in the case of both the elephant and the lion, the critical parameter, the criterion as it were, is the rate at which the animal can extract a certain kind of food component, and this is the saturated fatty acids, on the basis that saturated fatty acids are the optimal energy fuel for animal cells, and they are what the mitochondria in muscles and other organs really want in terms of generating power. So when the mitochondria produce power by respiring fuel and producing carbon dioxide and water, what they really prefer physiologically is saturated fatty acids, and sugar, such as glucose, although presented in textbooks as if it is the optimal fuel, is actually a second-grade fuel. What the lion eats, which is a virtually pure protein diet, breaking down into amino acids, is actually a third-grade fuel because it simply translates to glucose, namely sugar, from the point of view of respiration. And in order to get from protein through amino acids to glucose, you have to go through the trouble of getting rid of the nitrogen, which is a costly and potentially toxic business of excretion. And so, surprisingly enough, if you look at the rate at which a lion can extract its all-important saturated fatty acids from its diet, the lion is what you might call an extremophile. It's an animal that appears to be indulging in luxury consumption, almost like the cat that stole the cream. But in reality, it's making a living on an extremely difficult diet consisting of almost entirely protein. And because of the poor energy value of protein, it's actually struggling to make ends meet at one level of its being. And the result is that it's merely skimming the protein food that it eats for fatty acids, digesting some of the protein, but leaving most of it behind because it's simply too costly to bother with, and producing these protein-rich fecal deposits that are snapped up immediately like delicatessen items by the hooded vulture, as the hooded vulture's preferred food. Now let's bring it right back to the elephant. What the elephant does is a bit more complicated than what a lion does because it has to ferment its fibrous material in order to get much out of it. So what the elephant does is it has a gut fairly similar to the human gut, but much more voluminous, and so there's a lot more thermal inertia and thermodynamic economy of scale in an elephant's gut than in a human gut. But the principle is basically the same, which is you retain the fibrous material just long enough to produce some saturated fatty acids by virtue of anaerobic bacterial fermentation. You absorb those fatty acids as your preferred source of power, and then you decide whether you're going to bother to digest what's left. Now, for the elephant to continue to ferment the remaining fiber, and for the elephant to bother to extract the bacterial protein from the remains of its gut content doesn't seem to make sense, because it pays the elephant more just to eat some more and skim off some more of the fatty acids. And so what you wind up with is that the elephant appears to have optimized the rate at which it skims off the cream, as it were, from an ostensibly purely fibrous diet. And in the interests of keeping up that rate of absorption of saturated fatty acids, it's happy to dump most of what we would consider to be the food value of the food in the form of feces. And that protein-rich, bacterially laden material is, of course, ideal food for dung beetles. But the point we're making is that if you look through the prism of rate of return of saturated fatty acids, the elephant is not wasteful in its own eyes. What it's doing is optimizing the rate at which it gets what it really needs. And the wastefulness is more in the human viewer's mind, in the sense that we humans tend to be rather protein obsessed. And so anything that smacks of a waste of protein would seem to us to be puzzling. From the elephant's point of view, protein is really the last thing on its mind. What it's trying to do is convert cellulosic and ligneous plant fiber to saturated fat, and it does that by means of a certain configuration of its guts that produce bacterial fermentation. And so the bottom line here is that animals that we might regard as having optimal diets, like the lion, might actually have extreme diets in terms of profitability for saturated fatty acids, and other animals like the elephant that seem to produce feces as wasteful as those of the lion might have very different digestive strategies. But there's a common theme in the sense that it's not proteins but saturated fatty acids that rule. And when you start looking at comparative animal nutrition through that lens, we have an alternative and potentially equally insightful way of sorting out the sort of economic rationality of how animals go about foraging and digesting their food. And with that thought, we'll leave you until next time for a different topic here at the BioEdge. And until then, bye.